We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. What is going on, everybody? Week 8. Bunch of people in the chat were helping me trying to figure out this bot. So appreciate everyone that's been in here for a while trying to help us out. I did the best I could. I thought we were going to have, obviously, we had this bot earlier. We were doing on Wednesday. We could actually place votes. It was really cool. Now they're just straight up not working. So we'll see if we, I guess, try it again throughout the day. But how's everyone feeling? A lot to talk about today. I'm kind of glad we decided to move this back a half an hour just because, yeah, we're going to need it today. I think we're going to have to talk through all this weather. We're going to have to talk through some news, talk through roster construction. I actually think it's a really interesting slate for roster construction. It's not as easy to build teams, especially on DraftKings this week, that I feel comfortable with, especially like some of the game stacks. So it's pretty interesting. We will get there, guys. Again, apologies that the bot is not working. Who knows? We're just going to have to keep pushing through them. I've tried like 5 or 6 now. They have one that works really well for Twitch. They don't have one that works as well for YouTube. We'll work through it, guys. A couple people that were helping out earlier. Appreciate Third and Long. What's up, man? Richard Super was in here. Late Night Darren, of course. PJ Fappier, Richard Super, Chris Hinshaw, Aaron was in here. Wayne Casey. Appreciate you guys, man. I did the best I could. Sometimes technology just doesn't want to, I guess, cooperate. Let's hope that the audio holds up, because randomly that was last week. Randomly just doesn't start working. Oh, how's everyone feeling? Are we good? I'm feeling a little bit. I'm hesitant to say that this is my favorite slate of the entire year, but I kind of like the chaos a little bit. I think these are ones where, like, if you're paying attention and you're doing the right things in terms of like ownership and leverage and tournaments, these can be really profitable weeks, even if it, I guess, on the surface seems a little bit scary. We'll get to Derrick Henry, of course. Let's start this out before I kind of get to the rest of this in the chat quickly. We're gonna do a poll anyway. We're gonna literally go back and talk through who's gonna be the highest owned player on the slate, because I actually don't think it's as obvious as it was the last couple weeks. So let's do this. We're gonna go back to our old faithful way to kind of get a pulse of how everyone's feeling. So in the chat right now, if Derrick Henry is going to be the highest owned player on the slate on DraftKings, put a 1 in the chat. If you think it's going to be Kareem Hunt, put a 2 in the chat. If you think it's going to be Jamal Williams, put a 3 in the chat. Keenan Allen, put a 4 in the chat. And then if you think it's someone else, put a 5 in the chat and let me know who you think it is. So let's start with that. I think it's always kind of nice to get at least a pulse of the ownership first. Highest owned player on DraftKings. 1 in the chat for Derrick Henry, 2 in the chat for Kareem Hunt, 3 in the chat for Jamal Williams, 4 in the chat for Keenan Allen, or toss a 5 in there and let me know who you think it is if it's not one of those guys. Let's see where we're at here. Over 300 people in the chat already. We got tons of time, but I appreciate everyone here for sure. It's going to be a fun morning. All right, we got a lot of 1s and 2s, a lot of 2s coming in. A lot of Kareem Hunt people out there. I think I kind of agree, if I'm being honest. You should start using straw poll for your voting. I looked into straw poll, Brett, but it doesn't show on the screen as far as I know. And you don't actually place your bet in the chat, right? I want to be placing my bets in the chat because it actually like helps us out with Google and having more people find us. It's all a game, right? Noel fan in the chat, what's up, man? He says, Noel, just coming in here like chirping all the time, man. Love it. What's up, dude? How's it going? How's your morning? For the record, Noel says that Kurt Warner is the play today. Derrick Henry smash week. Is that true, man? Oh, I'm not ready to make like a firm stance on Derrick Henry just yet. Late Night Darren, 300 people, less than 100 likes. Let's go. Hey, man. It's all good. It's a Sunday. Everyone just being here more than enough for sure. The likes help out just with helping more people find us. But we'll be in good shape. These are fun shows for sure. We got 12 people hanging out on Patreon. We got another 15 on Twitch. Come hang out with us on YouTube, guys. That's where we're going to keep this conversation going. I'll get to a bunch of questions, of course. We'll work our way through these, I guess, weird games in terms of weather. But it looks like I'm going to see what we got here outside of some of those top guys. It looks like mostly Kareem Hunt in the chat right now. A little bit of Derrick Henry for sure. What else we got? Three-way tie between Jamal, Henry, and Hunt. I think those are the guys, Frank. I'm kind of with you on that. Chiefs D 40%. You think people are going to pay that much for D? They're expensive. They're expensive. Devontae Adams at 5. I actually think Devontae Adams might go a little bit lower owned than people realize. I think people are just going to jam in Kamara and Henry in that range. We'll see. Every week is King Henry week, Joe. Yeah, that's what they keep telling me. It's just easier to type the names and remembering the numbers. Seeing a bunch of Hunt in the chat will be easy to see. That's true, Yankees. Maybe we'll pivot to that for right now until I get that bot working. Henry only smashes when he's 30% on. What's up, Gavin? Yeah, I said that earlier in the week. It does feel that way, doesn't it? That the only time that he truly goes crazy is when you're not just trying to get him at lower ownership. And like for the record, like the whole point of the playing Derrick Henry at low ownership isn't because of I hate Derrick Henry, none of those things. It's like these guys that don't catch like an elite level of passes at that high end salary. I'd rather pay for their ceiling when I'm going to get them and it's actually really going to help, right? If you fade a guy like Derrick Henry and he goes like 80 yards on his 24 touches or whatever and doesn't score, you're passing a lot of people. Obviously, a really good spot this week, so we'll get to that for sure. Let's do. I kind of want to wait to completely dive into the weather, but let's do this as we're going through today. Let me know in the chat if anything kind of changes throughout these. I've been kind of monitoring throughout the morning. Obviously, the thing we're always talking about with weather, guys, is wind and sustained wind. So once it hits like that 15 to 20 mile per hour winds, I do try and take a bit of notice, but sustained winds are really important. But one of the things that I want to mention right off the hop was listening to one of the established run shows, obviously Michael Leone, someone that is on the Tilt Space with me every week, but they had a great guest this week, Chris Allen, someone that I know a little bit, but one of the more under the radar sharp people in the industry for sure. He's done a little bit of research in terms of like the actual stadium construction and wind and that sort of thing. Hear me out though. Hear me out. So apparently, according to Chris Allen, follow Chris Allen on Twitter. Apparently, the way like how tall a stadium is can actually serve as somewhat of like a barrier for wind and actually reduce what happens on the field. Because that's what's really important, guys, is that yes, there can be 15 mile per hour winds. It can be literally sustained gusts, all of those things, but we don't truly know what it's like on the field. And that's the important thing. It really is. Like that is what matters. So what Chris Allen's saying is there are certain stadiums, because they're taller, some are more wide open. Some of these taller stadiums can serve as like kind of a little bit of a barrier. So if we're looking at Minnesota, Green Bay, Las Vegas, Cleveland, New England, Buffalo, New Orleans, Chicago, Tennessee, Cincinnati. One of the ones that's kind of interesting in terms of having a taller stadium is this Vegas and Cleveland game. So that actually makes me, I guess, think a little bit less about the wind in that game. Think if there's any sort of edge there, because there are a lot of plays in that game. That's interesting. It's not that it's not going to be affected at all. It's that like something inside the stadium, maybe we get a little bit more of a buffer in a stadium like that. On the other side of it, New England and Buffalo, kind of a shorter, more wide open stadium. It's possible that on the field, there's a lot more wind going on in general. So I think that that's something that I've never really added to, I guess, my game. But like, I mean, you got 5 games on the slate with all this wind. You got to dig into it a little bit more. So I would say that would be the one I'm the most worried about from that perspective. I think that's really sharp by Chris there. In terms of like the actual kind of numbers we're looking at here, Minnesota, Green Bay, looks like we have sustained winds, 20 to 26 miles per hour, gusts up to 40 plus. So who's going to be the most impacted by that in the Minnesota, Green Bay game? I think it's Justin Jefferson. He's going to be one of those ones that's going to be playing on the outside a little bit more. Obviously, some deeper targets down the field. Everyone wants to talk about Jair Alexander. I'll leave the wide receiver cornerback analysis to some other people. I still think that Thielen's reasonable. But Justin Jefferson, I think, is the one in that game that is affected the most by the wind. Las Vegas and Cleveland, winds 21 to 26 miles per hour, gusts of 40 plus with a little bit of rain. But we'll say that the stadium is a little bit taller. If you think that helps, great. The one thing that I want to mention right off the top, too, before we get into these other ones, and someone just mentioned in the chat, Mark Smith, totals dropped 7.5 points. That's the big part about all of this, guys. And that's what I think what some people probably don't realize. And I've heard Leone talk about this before. We don't want to double count things. You guys know what I mean by that? So there's projections. There's all of these things that are happening. But it's all taken into account by Vegas lines. It's taken into account by the projections as a whole. And I think about this the same way in terms of matchups sometimes, because if we're going to count the matchup for projections, but then we're also going to count it in our analysis as like a tiebreaker, I kind of think that that's bad personally. So we don't want to double count weather either. So if weather is already being taken into account in terms of like Vegas, like Mark said in the chat, this Las Vegas and Cleveland game is dropping by 7.5 points. Yeah, take some notice of that kind of thing. That definitely matters. That is going to affect the projections anyway, for the record, depending on what you're using. If the Vegas line drops, the projection is going to go down. Don't double count things. I'll say that. But with games like this, it doesn't mean that some of these games cannot go off. Like, there's been games that have happened every single year that people avoid because of wind, because of weather, that still end up being at the top of GPP. So it doesn't mean you can't play these. It just means you have to be thoughtful about them. I think some of the pieces that you go after also, like, is the leverage worth it? Is the ceiling worth it? How do these offenses interact with each other anyways before all of this? So I think that's something to keep in mind. We did mention that New England and Buffalo, the most worried about in terms of the structure of the stadium. So that's interesting. Winds 21 to 25 mile per hour, gusts up to 40 plus in that one as well. Also some rain. So that's interesting. Those would be the ones I'm the most worried about, I would say, in terms of like the highest wind, sustained wind that we've seen. Green Bay, Minnesota, Las Vegas, Cleveland, New England, Buffalo. A couple of the ones that don't seem quite as bad, but still not good. New Orleans and Chicago, 15 to 20 mile per hour winds, gusts up to 35 mile per hour. Tennessee, Cincinnati, 15 to 20 miles per hour, gusts up to 35 as well. So like that's like, I guess, the least ones that I'm worried about of these five. Still not good. Still not good. But I just want to make it very clear that let's not double count things, because if you're using projections, a lot of times it is already in there. It's raining on the East Coast now. Yeah, so the rain isn't what I'm as worried about as some of this wind stuff, but I mean, it still matters for sure. Which stadium was tall? The Cleveland Stadium. That's what people are telling me, at least. We might need an architect as a guest on the show. That might be helpful. That might be helpful. So that's where I'm at on the win, guys. I'll touch on that again probably in like 30 minutes or so, just to make sure that we kind of got that to everyone that's going to be coming through today. But over almost 500 people in the chat already, just kind of getting our feet set here. We still have almost 40 over on Twitch. Guys, let's try and hit 1K again today live. That would be really cool. We got that last week. We hit that milestone. Would love it if we could do that again. If you guys have any other questions throughout in terms of the win, that sort of stuff, let's definitely do that and go through that per usual. Was hoping to have the polls ready for you guys this week. They worked on Wednesday, decided to just not work this morning. So we'll do our normal poll type of things that we usually do. In terms of news, guys, there's not a ton. We kind of knew what was going to be happening. I guess we expected what was going to be happening in New Orleans. Alvin Kamara, again, like he just has all of this volume because of all the injuries that they have there overall. So it's kind of tough for someone like me that's always just going to be chasing volume to fade a guy like Alvin Kamara in favor of someone like Derrick Henry. Both of them very good plays. I do prefer Kamara for just 200 more on DraftKings. Obviously, Derrick Henry is 9,500 on FanDuel, which is interesting. But we'll get to some specific plays in a second. I want to make sure I get through some of this news. So we were talking about that Chicago game a little bit. Looks like Khalil Mack, ankle injury. He is expected to play in Week 8, though, so that's a little bit interesting for sure. Dalvin Cook is the one that everyone wants to talk about. He is expected to play with a full workload in Week 8 against the Packers, so I think that's super interesting also. We'll get to him. I didn't notice like a ton of like crazy stuff that came out on Chapter Bombs last week. It does look like Tevin Coleman's going to be back from the injured reserve against the Seahawks. Love that San Francisco and Seattle game, for the record. We'll get to that for sure. No offense, says he loves him some Jacobs. Interesting, though. We'll get to that one. I think that's interesting. Will Harris, thanks for subscribing to the channel, man. Really appreciate it. We got over 500 people in here. Again, if you're here for the first time, would love it if you would just join Will in subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. Mondays and Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Also, obviously on Sundays, now we're at 9 a.m. Directly after this is the Line Movement NFL show with Dieter Kurtenbach and Peter Overzet. We'll walk through a little bit more betting angle over there. Any other news that I missed, guys? Obviously, Sean Lee, that's pretty big in terms of being activated from the injured reserve for the Cowboys. Maybe they get a little bit of a bump. Looks like Andy Dalton will not be in. We got Ben DiNucci as the starter for the Dallas Cowboys. What a world. What a world. Thanks, Joshua. I appreciate you, my man. All right, so let's do this, guys. Normally at this portion of the program, we'll start to go kind of position by position. So let's bring you guys over to the data table. So this is at linemovement.com, resources tab, NFL data table. This is a free resource that we make available. This is something that used to be available only to my Twitch subscribers. We're doing it for free at linemovement.com. So what we're doing, each position kind of going through. I think that this is one of the most valuable free resources on the internet. Personally, we have some ownership projections in here. Obviously, we have a bunch of Vegas data from blitzbet.eu, and then some very specific metrics at each position that I think really matter. Of course, we've got some projections in here for like rushing yards, touches, that sort of thing. But just as an example, at wide receiver, weighted opportunity rating, obviously this is a stat from airyards.com. Josh Hermsmeyer, target market share of air yards, but also market share of the team's targets overall. Great metric for DFS. We have all of this kind of color-coded here. Still working through some of the graphical stuff here, but I think it's a very useful tool. At quarterback, we're going to do this like we always do. But actually, since we have so many people in the chat, I'm going to take, I guess, something from earlier today. At quarterback, who is your favorite quarterback on the DraftKings slate, price considered? Let's go with Russell Wilson. You can put a 1 in the chat, or you can just say Russell Wilson. Joe Burrow, 6,200, Cincinnati against Tennessee. That's a game a lot of people like. Patrick Mahomes, 8,100. Or Jimmy Garoppolo at 5,400. Very cheap Jimmy Garoppolo. Let's go with those four for now. And if you're going with another guy, let me know in the chat who that is. Jeremy Collier says, let's get 1K in here. You never know, man. It always seems like as we go on, more people trickle in, you know? We got some Herbert people in the chat. Okay. Some Derek Carr people. Who's our favorite quarterback today? Price considered, guys. Jimmy G. A lot of people on the Jimmy G train today. Interesting. Jimmy G for cash. Okay. That's fair. Of those four, Burrow, Chris says. Interesting. Price considered Burrow. My main guy is Allen. Interesting. You like Allen in that game still? Against New England. He seems expensive to me, personally. But a low-owned Josh Allen, not the worst thing in the world, man. That's for sure. A lot of Mahomes people. So more people are definitely on the Mahomes thing, I think, because of, obviously, all the weather that's happening, that massive team total. If you're on Mahomes, you assume they're at least going to do something on the other side, right? The nice thing about the Jets is there's a lot of wide receiver options that are very cheap. We would assume they're going to be in very good game script the whole game. So we'll get to that for sure. Stacking up the Jets side of it, much tougher to do, but we have some very good value options. We got Denzel Mims, 3,200. Braxton Berrios, if you wanted to go there, at 3,500. I mean, they're going to be getting a little bit of volume, right? They have to be. So I'm in on that. A lot of Jimmy G people in the chat. I like the Tannehill call, though. I like the Tannehill call. Tua. You're actually going to go to Tua, Mr. Portugal. Interesting. I don't know if I have the stones for that one. But for the record, guys, I play mostly kind of the mid-stakes tournaments, doing a little bit more 3-max than I did before. But I like to really focus on the smaller field tournaments overall. A lot of Mims people in the chat, too. All right, so let's dive in here. So I think that obviously the thing that at playing some of those smaller field tournaments, just really focusing on guys that have some rushing ability is something I would prefer to do. So the guy that really sticks out to me today, just really taking into consideration all of the wind and all of that sort of stuff that we have to deal with. I still really love Russell Wilson. The Seattle and San Francisco game is one of my favorite games on the slate. I'm still trying to figure out exactly where his ownership will be. It's probably about right. At quarterback, it's mostly flat like this anyway. Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes. I think Patrick Mahomes makes a really nice stack today, but just like a standalone type of quarterback option, I still prefer Russ in this game. I think that there's a chance that Jimmy G on the other side of it, yeah, someone mentioned him as like the cash game option. I'm fine with that. 5,400. That's a really nice price point for him. But at the top, I do prefer Russ today. I think Russ and Mahomes is very close. I'll probably have two teams, at least one with each of them. today. That's kind of where I'm leaning, at least right now. Both of these guys will rush a little bit, but I do like the idea of just stacking up this game. We know is going to have a decent game environment. I'm not really on Josh Allen. At 2%, I guess it's interesting. I think this game in Buffalo and New England, there's some pace concerns, obviously weather concerns. New England's just so decimated, and I'm not really convinced on the other side. There's a ton of value there. If you did want to go with like a really cheap kind of mini stack, I think that Cam Newton is kind of interesting, just because of the rushing ability, just because of the price of 5,700. If you wanted to go to Jacoby Meyers, he's the one that is kind of hopefully going to be taking over most of that Edelman role in the slot. That's kind of where you would be attacking Buffalo anyway. So I think that's a pretty clear skinny stack for Cam today. I think you can play him naked to get up to some of these more expensive options, but I do think that that's interesting. Lamar Jackson at 7,400. There's an argument for Lamar Jackson here that he hasn't had to completely go crazy yet because they haven't really needed to in Baltimore. Pittsburgh, I think, is going to be a much bigger test. This is the game I'm the most excited to watch for sure. I think Hollywood Brown is one of my favorite wide receiver plays on the slate. So if I'm going to have some Hollywood Brown, I'm considering Lamar at 7,400 when Patrick Mahomes is 81, Russell Wilson's is 78. If we get like a 5% Lamar Jackson today, I could dig that. I don't know if I'd be fully stacking that up, but I do like some kind of like lower owned plays on the other side of that game a little bit. So Jimmy G, let's talk about Jimmy G for a second, because obviously if we can, we'd prefer to pay down at quarterback, right? So the Seattle Seahawks, this is a fantastic matchup. This is something that Rich Rebar brought up on my show on Monday, just because of how many plays that they're allowing on the other side for opposing offenses. So I love that. I think that this is, it's not quite a historical in terms of a historically bad defense for Seattle, but the amount of plays that they're allowing is pretty crazy. So it's kind of a little bit tougher for me to go all in on Jimmy G, a team that does want to run. Obviously, no Deebo Samuel. That hurts for quite a bit. But I do think that like the price at 5,400, the overall game environment, Seattle and San Francisco is very strong. Still a reasonable team total there. I still think that's enough to put Jimmy G in play for me at that range. So like Jimmy G versus Derek Carr is probably a decision that a lot of people are making. It's a very similar play, I think. Darren Waller is a great way to kind of get rid of tight end. I always say get rid of tight end because it's not like it's a position that's just so much harder to project than some of the other ones. So I do like Derek Carr a bit all the way down here. If you really wanted to get weird, obviously we have that $1,000 millionaire maker that we're playing on the tilt space this week. Sam Darnold at 4,800 with like just like a couple cheap Jets options, and then you can basically onslaught the rest of your team with like Kamara, with Derrick Henry if you want, with Devontae Adams. Like I built a couple Darnold teams this morning. I'm not sure if I'll fully have the stones to get there. Cam Newton, you can play naked at 5,700. I think that he's okay. In terms of like, one of the things that I do like to look at, I'm not really big on like looking at matchups overall. But one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is what types of teams are being beat deep. What types of teams give up a lot in terms of the deep ball? Does that match up at all with quarterbacks that like to throw deep? To me, that's part of the argument for Russell Wilson. So San Francisco, 25th in the NFL at defending the deep ball. We know Russell aired out, so his average intended air yards is top 5 on the slate. So that's interesting. You can make an argument for Kirk Cousins, obviously, with the weather there. That's going to affect the deep ball. So you can kind of X out that a little bit from my perspective against Green Bay, even though Green Bay can be beat deep. Not so much on that one. So I think the one that makes the most sense from that perspective is probably Russ. Someone in the chat mentioned Justin Herbert earlier. I think that's interesting. Above average matchup in terms of throwing deep. He's throwing it, I guess he hasn't airing it out quite like some of these other guys. He's not Drew Lock in his 10.5 average intended air yards, but he'll chuck it. I think that's interesting. We got some cheap options for Cleveland who we'll talk about. So I think Baker, I guess this is like, you got to preface all of this with the win stuff, but we'll probably in about, 20 minutes, we'll go through kind of what my thoughts on the wind if anyone's asking in the chat. I know there's a couple questions in there again. But I think this is a really interesting week at quarterback because I don't think there's like a clear standout play. Russell Wilson is probably my favorite if we're taking into consideration price. I think there's some other guys that are cheaper that are interesting. I think Jimmy G's fine. I think Cam, if you really wanted to go gross and all the way down, makes some sense. Another guy we haven't talked about, Joe Burrow, at 6,200 in this Cleveland-Tennessee game. I think he's a little bit interesting as well. So one thing that I kind of like to look at is completion rate above or below expectation. Russell Wilson, this is an efficiency metric. We know we want efficiency at quarterback, so that's something that I'm always looking at this. Normally, you'll see some of the best quarterbacks up here. Russell Wilson, obviously, at the top, just insane amount of efficiency from him. Interesting to see Derek Carr up here also at 5,500, but Joe Burrow at 62. He'll give us a little bit of rushing equity, which is great. The team total is reasonable pace, probably above average pace. We'll say that. They've been passing at a decent rate. So I think Joe Burrow is actually kind of interesting at 6,200. I think that the fact that Joe Mixon is out, like in theory, like that kind of tilts things in favor of the passing game a little bit there. We got AJ Green, who's playing better. We've got T. Higgins. We've got some weapons here that we can stack. So I think that Joe Burrow, he's not priced out for me just yet at 6,200. I think it's a great matchup. I think the ceiling is still high, for the record. I think the biggest concern here, and everyone wants to talk about it, it's Cincinnati's offensive line. So they're very banged up. Like, he's without 3 of his starting offensive linemen in this spot. So that's a concern for sure. It's part of the reason we like the Tennessee defense a little bit today. So I like that quite a bit. If you are going to play up, let's do this. If you're going to stack up Joe Burrow, who are you stacking with him? I need your help, chat. So let's do this. We'll do a very quick and dirty poll here. If you're playing Joe Burrow, put a 1 in the chat if you're stacking it with AJ Green. Put a 2 in the chat if you're stacking with T. Higgins. Put a 3 in the chat if you're stacking with either Boyd or Gio Bernard. Let's do that. Miguel Cracker, Holka is a new Millie winner. Vegas is on me now. What's up, man? You won the Millie? Was that you last week that took advantage of that that sack that was deleted from that other guy? Congrats, Miguel. That's huge, man. Fantastic. Let's get the answers to the test from Miguel. All right. Oh, we got a sample in the chat. Interesting. Higgins, Green. Okay. Boyd and Green. We got a decent amount of people on Boyd in this spot, which is interesting. Green is very cheap. The air yards are there. He's in the buy low model, all that good stuff. We got more Boyd people than I figured. So again, put a 1 in the chat for AJ Green, 2 in the chat for T. Higgins, 3 in the chat for either Tyler Boyd or Gio Bernard if you're stacking up Burrow. Interesting. Richard Super is on, he's on T. Higgins. Interesting. Is anyone like worried that these air yards for AJ Green just aren't as valuable as they used to be because he's mostly washed? He's been pretty good the last 2 weeks, guys. I'm trying to get that out of my head. Green and Higgins sample. Interesting. Yeah, so like this game is very interesting overall. I like the Cincinnati and Tennessee game quite a bit. Still, guys, 15 to 20 mile per hour winds here. So maybe that does lead us a little bit more to Boyd, even though it's not as good of a matchup. I do this every show. I warm up my coffee directly before I go live, and then it's so hot I can't even drink it during. All right. Fair enough. I think the highest owned guy in that group obviously is going to be Gio Bernard, but I think that it could be relatively spread out for the pass catchers to me. Noel Fan says bad O-line for Burrows equals higher rushing equity. I agree with that, Noel. I agree with that. I think he's one of my favorite my favorite quarterback plays at 6,200. I think he's really sharp. Anything else, guys, at quarterback? We spent a little bit more time on it than normal, but I think that it's one that's super interesting for sure. The contest is on the Joe Holka Discord server. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, Stan. So if you guys didn't know, I did start a Patreon last week. So this is something that just gives us a way for us to interact after the live streams, I guess kind of get the community together to learn all that good stuff. It's $1 a month, 25 cents a week. Lot of benefits here, though. So I wanted to make sure it was at least super valuable to you guys. We're doing a weekly DraftKings tournament just with the Hulkamaniacs community, which is fun. Last week we gave away a $20 Amazon gift card. This week we're going to do a $30 Amazon gift card. I'll just continue to raise that prize. The goal of the Patreon is not to make money, obviously. We have over 150 people in here already. So join this if you want to kind of get more involved in what we're trying to build here on the community side of things. Obviously, the Discord chat, a lot of great conversation throughout the entire week, which is awesome. I'll have Red Zone going in one of the channels, kind of sweat the games together. Also, which I think will be probably much more valuable, I guess, than a normal week with all we're kind of trying to make these final decisions with weather, that sort of stuff. I'll be doing either a 15 to 30 minute live stream directly before kickoff. That's going to be something that's not on YouTube, is only in the Discord. So my true final thoughts is what we're doing with this. So let's see if we can get this up to 200 before next week. I think that would be really cool. Again, 25 cents per month. I think we're offering a ton of value here, and we'll continue to increase that as we go on. What are we thinking at running back today, guys? I think we should get back to it at some point. But let's do a quick poll before we move over to the data sheet again. Who will be the highest owned running back on the slate today? Let's put a 1 in the chat for Kareem Hunt. Let's put a 2 in the chat for Alvin Kamara. Let's put a 3 in the chat for Derrick Henry. And we'll do a 4 in the chat for either Jamal Williams or Gio Bernard, since those guys are priced so closely together. Let's see where we're at on this. Highest owned running back play on the slate. Kareem Hunt put a 1 in the chat. Alvin Kamara put a 2 in the chat. Derrick Henry put a 3 in the chat. And then for 4, put either Jamal Williams or Gio Bernard. Let's see where we're at here. Henry, Kamara, a lot of people smashing in Hunt. A lot of 1s in the chat. Tyler's on 1. Eric's on Hunt too. Mark Hansen's on Hunt. So we all kind of, we somewhat agree that Hunt will be the highest owned. Okay, fair enough. Let's move over to the data sheet here. Again, if you're just trickling in, guys, we have almost 800 people in the chat. Another 40 over on Twitch. Let's try and make it to 1K again today. That'd be really fun. So just looking at this, obviously this is the free resource at linemovement.com, resources tab, NFL data table, all that good stuff. We're just looking purely at touches today, guys. It's pretty clear that Kareem Hunt at 6,900 is very, very underpriced. I don't think you guys are tuning in to hear that. But it is a fantastic, fantastic option on DraftKings. He was a great play last week. Didn't completely work out, of course. He's someone that's been like a little bit banged up, even though he's had some of this like increased workload. So if he ends up continuing to handle 90% of the snaps, like 95% of these like running back touches overall, it's just elite usage that we're not going to get when Chubb comes back after the bye. So love the idea. At 6,900, he's just so underpriced. The Browns, now that there's no Odell Beckham, maybe they they were already a run-centric team, right? So it's pretty crazy that DraftKings hasn't adjusted him. On FanDuel, he's 8,200. So he's like probably correctly priced on FanDuel, right? On DraftKings, I would argue that he is not correctly priced. So he's been like one of the first guys in to the majority of my lineups. Kind of the way that I approach running back in particular. So if he's going to be 30% owned, that's the current projection. This is probably something that I would just prefer to either double the field, be significantly overweight. I don't like to match the field with these type of plays. So if we're going to, I guess, play the overweight side of Kareem Hunt, where are we at on Derrick Henry? He's 26%. Last week, 1% at the high stakes. We get the floor game, of course. It is a fantastic spot against Cincinnati, guys. There's no doubt about it. I'm not telling anyone to come in here and just enjoy the pain that I like to endure with Derrick Henry. It's a great spot. The Bengals offensive line, like it's still like so unlikely that there's like a lot of negative game script here for the Titans. So that plays to the strengths, obviously, of the big dog here to get a ton of touches. He's AK on DraftKings. He's not going to catch a ton of passes. We know this, right? We got him at 2.5 receptions right now. These other guys in this touch range, in this even just this salary range, a much higher floor in terms of receptions. But if we're looking at ceiling, we know the ceiling for Derrick Henry, and it is a great matchup. The ownership is what scares me a little bit. I would rather attack the Derrick Henry ceiling when he's going to be like at least less than 10%. I don't know, guys. It's tough. I know there's a lot of people in chat talking about it right now, even playing him in cash. There's ways to get up to Derrick Henry. There's a lot of very, very solid wide receiver, cheaper options this week. So I get that for sure. And there's value in these guys that we know are going to touch the ball a ton of times, but also just like there's no one that's going to take work away for the goal line. All of those good things, right? So I think like if you just look at it from that perspective, the matchup, just take the matchup completely out of it. If you just look at it, how many times is this guy going to touch the ball? Like Derrick Henry, 24 touches against Cincinnati. It's not a terrible price tag. I'm just a little bit like my eyebrows are raised by this 26% ownership. That's all I'm saying. Play Derrick Henry. I might have a Derrick Henry team out there. Going to be rolling out a few more teams than normal, and then I'm going to have some FanDuel action over there as well. 9,500 on FanDuel is a tougher price tag for sure. So past these guys, Jamal Williams versus Gio Bernard at kind of a similar price point, right? So Jamal Williams, 6,100. Gio Bernard, 5,800. Pretty similar touches. I prefer Jamal Williams again this week. So we talked a little bit about Green Bay and the weather, the wind, all that stuff. I think this is a really good spot to go back to Jamal Williams. Very high team total here at almost 29 points at blitzbet.eu. That's something that definitely matters in terms of trying to capture upside, trying to capture touchdowns, all that good stuff. So Jamal Williams, Aaron Jones is out, obviously, that calf injury. Really, like we talked about Henry, like there's value in having like no worries whatsoever, really. And I in terms of like someone coming in and stealing work, I'm not worried about A.J. Dillon. He was like barely used last week. So like if he's going to like, I don't like Jamal Williams had a passing game role before this Aaron Jones injury. So I don't think that priced him up enough, in my opinion. 6,100, 23 touches, 5 receptions. I'm in on that. I think you like don't overthink it in that way. I think he's a really strong play. There's just not a lot of talent for the Vikings defense right now, guys. There's really not. Someone in the chat said Cook and Williams together. I think you can do that. I definitely think that there's an argument for not doing that correlation-wise. Both of these guys are game script independent. How do we feel about Dalvin Cook? Do you think a lot of people just aren't going to go there because of the injury? 7,500. Obviously, there's better price plays. Kareem Hunt, Jamal Williams, Gio, for just looking at price point, touch per dollar, whatever you want to call it. But Dalvin Cook in this game where you think they're probably going to have to skew more to the run anyway if there's a ton of win, I think he's interesting. I think this is probably about right, around 10%. I think I definitely prefer Kareem Hunt. I definitely prefer Alvin Kamara. But I think he's interesting in tournaments for sure. Noel, I want to hear your Josh Jacobs call at 6,200 in the chat if Noel's still in here. Jacobs and Hunt. There's a couple people talking about Josh Jacobs. So let's break it down. So Josh Jacobs in this game that we do like for sure. In a game we know there's going to be a decent amount of wind, 21 to 26 miles per hour, gusts up to 40 plus miles per hour. There's some rain. I loved Henry Ruggs earlier in the week. Now I think that's a little bit a tougher sell. Someone that makes his living on these like bigger plays. Now it's going to be harder to get the ball down the field. So Josh Jacobs at 6,200, about 18 touches or so. This might be a little bit light. Might be able to bump that up a little bit with the weather and all that. 3.4 receptions. This is reasonable, no? In the short area of the field, Cleveland 26th in the league at defending the short area of the field. Maybe we bump this up slightly in the passing game. Not a great team total, but I think this is okay. I don't mind Josh Jacobs, no. I think he's fine. Someone said Myles Gaskin at 5,200. I like him quite a bit. I mean, we just know, like I've been jamming in Gaskin probably more than most people. They don't want to remove his price. And a lot of it has to do with this really low team total, right? Against the Rams, I don't think, like if there was a spot for Tua to make his debut, this is not the spot against Aaron Donald, right? Against basically, I mean, Ramsey as well, if you want to throw that into it. It's a tough spot. There's a chance that Miami ends up they're running the ball well, like even before the quarterback change. 5,200 for Myles Gaskin, I think, is really strong if you're looking for a value play at running back. Oh, God, the Melvin Gordon revenge game. Have we gotten to this? We've gotten this far, King? 5,600. Oh, man. I think it's all right. I'm not really in on it personally. I definitely prefer all these other guys we talked about. So, like, revenge games are great. They also make the ownership a little bit higher than it probably deserves to be. You could probably make the same exact case for Le'Veon Bell. He's 4,600. He'll probably come in and get a touchdown, guys. I would be shocked if he didn't, actually. 4,600, I just don't think the ceiling is there in terms of touches for Le'Veon. Richard, I think Taylor's pretty sharp, actually. I like the Taylor call. So let's look at Taylor for a second. He's 6,600. This Indy and Detroit game, if I haven't mentioned, guys, this is the game, like, obviously, not a ton of concerns overall. It's in the Dome. And a lot of people just don't want to click on, like, Phillip Rivers, the pass catchers. I get that. But even, like, on the other side of this game, what do we think about Megatron? Babytron, whatever you want to call him. I love Kenny Goliday. We'll get to that at wide receiver. So we're looking at Taylor here, 6,600. About 18 touches roughly, 3.2. Do we think he's going to be about 8%? I think he'll be lower than that. I kind of disagree with that ownership projection personally. So the way that I would play Taylor, I think, would be like, we talk about mini stacks a decent amount, right? So what I mean by mini stack is just like a correlation play that you try and jam into your lineup, but maybe you don't have the quarterback. So like when I normally do that is in games where I don't think there's going to be a quarterback that has any rushing ability, because I still want the rushing ceiling, floor, all that stuff. But these mini correlation plays. So if I was to play Jonathan Taylor, I would probably play him in the same lineup with a Goliday on the other side. Does that make sense? Gavin, Goliday was the helicopter play. Is that true? Can someone confirm that? Is Goliday the Ian Hardis helicopter play? Makes me like him even more. I love that. That's great. I love Ian, by the way. So I think that's really interesting, guys. I do like I like Taylor quite a bit. The one guy we I guess haven't talked about enough probably is Alvin Kamara, 8,200. I guess it's just kind of implied that if you're going to touch the ball 20 times minimum, if you're going to get 7 catches minimum, he should be in lineups on DraftKings, a full PPR site. Do you guys need me to tell you guys that Kamara is a good play? Gavin, I know you wouldn't lie to me, man. Goliday is the helicopter play. Makes me like him even more. Good stuff. All right, before we move on to wide receiver, guys, always want to mention that if you haven't checked out the Tilt Space, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, myself, Peter Overzet, Michael Leone, we go through all of our high-stakes teams on DraftKings. Obviously, we'll go through the Las Vegas Super Contest Gold, our bets against the spread, all that good stuff. Just a fun show. Depending on how your day is going, good or bad, come sweat the games with us tonight. This is my favorite show to do literally every week. This is on the Line Movement YouTube channel, so be sure and check that out if you haven't already. A ton of fun. There is a decent amount of value that happens on the Tilt Space as well. We'll talk through some game theory stuff, some higher level DFS stuff. Always a good time. So let's move over to wide receiver, guys. Actually, before we do that, we haven't touched on this weather situation for a little bit longer. So I want to make sure that there's a lot of people in here that might not have been here when we first started. 850 people total. We got 45 over on Twitch. Hey, people on Twitch, come join us on YouTube. Let's hit it over 1K again. Anyone that hasn't already would love it if you consider subscribing to the channel, toss a like on this video, all that good stuff. But in terms of weather, guys, one of the things that I thought was the most interesting today, I guess throughout the week as I was kind of doing some research, but also listening to a lot of smart people, Chris Allen was on the Established Run show with Michael Leone, was talking about some of the research that he's done in terms of the actual stadiums and the impact on wind. So hear me out for a second. So, and I know for anyone that was here, I guess right at the beginning, I'm just going to nail this point home because I think it's super important. We don't care. We care about wind, obviously. 15 mile per hour plus is what we're kind of looking at when it's going to start to affect DFS, fantasy, all that stuff. But one thing that's interesting is, yes, you could just go to weather.com and see that there's 15 mile per hour winds. It's not the same thing everywhere because we care about what the wind is like on the field. So it's interesting that Chris Allen did this research about how the stadium is actually constructed can really affect things. And I think it's really sharp. So how tall the stadium is, sometimes it can serve as like a little bit of like a barrier for some of this wind, which can reduce, obviously, the wind aspect of what's happening on the field. So I think that's really interesting. So let's go through a couple of these games. So these would be ones that I have like some high concerns about. Minnesota and Green Bay. Looks like we have sustained winds, and that's a buzzword that you want to look into. Sustained winds, 20 to 26 miles per hour. Looks like we have gusts at 40 plus. That's rough. So like, who does that affect most in the Minnesota and Green Bay game? Probably Justin Jefferson. I think you can make an argument for like guys like Thielen and Adams still, because they can still get it done in the short to intermediate. They can still be massive target hogs. If you want to talk about Jair Alexander, you're probably in the wrong place. But yes, he will be on the field. He will be probably taking a decent amount away from Jefferson anyway, probably a good chunk from Thielen also. So this Minnesota and Green Bay game, yes, big time concerns, mostly for Jefferson for me personally. Las Vegas, Cleveland. Again, winds 21 to 26 miles per hour, gusts up to 40 plus. There's some rain in this game. This is the game from a stadium perspective that we're probably the least worried about, according to Chris Allen, because it's very tall. I can't believe we're talking about this right now. So literally, if we care about the tall versus short stadium narrative, the Las Vegas Cleveland game isn't one you should be completely avoiding. I'll say one thing that is a little bit scary to me personally, though, is I mentioned it before, but Henry Ruggs is a play that I really liked in this game because Cleveland can be beat with the deep ball. They've given up a ton of big plays. Who does a lot of big plays on the other side? It's Henry Ruggs. But now with this wind, maybe there isn't a chance for him to really just get one deep from Derek Carr, if that's ever a thing. But I do have some concerns there about Ruggs. We talked about Jefferson in the Minnesota Green Bay game. I think Ruggs in Las Vegas and Cleveland would be some big time concerns. So, New England and Buffalo. That's the next game that I have some pretty high concerns about. Winds 21 to 25 miles per hour, gusts 40 plus, rain. This is actually the one, again, according to Chris Allen and talking through some of these stadium, I guess, narratives. There's a shorter kind of stadium overall in this New England Buffalo game. So who is this affecting the most? Probably Josh Allen, right? Someone that's going to be throwing the ball deep. I think this game is kind of gross overall. We talk about how these offenses mesh together versus the defenses, that sort of stuff. This game could just be kind of gross in general. I do think Cam, we talked about Cam before, if you're just completely punting off quarterback in order to get up some of these Kamara, Henry, those type of plays, Devontae Adams, then yeah, I still think that Cam is in play if you want to, like, I guess, leverage some of the Jimmy G people that are going to play him down there at the lower end of the salary spectrum. So the high concerns I have, Minnesota, Green Bay, Las Vegas, Cleveland, New England, Buffalo. In terms of like two other games that we should probably touch on, obviously very decent concerns, 15 to 20 per hour winds, gusts up to 35 miles per hour, New Orleans, Chicago, Tennessee, Cincinnati. So that's a lot of games, guys. That's 5 games with these type of concerns. It's crazy. We got Chris Neville in the chat. What's up, man? Chris, if you're just tuning in, rewind the last literally 3 minutes and listen to the wind stuff that we're just talking about. So I think that's what I would be really focused on. You're focused on 15 mile per hour plus, which is all 5 of those games, those gusts that are 40% or 40 plus mile per hour, but also sustained wind, also avoiding these stadiums that are a little bit shorter, because then there's going to be a little bit more of this wind that actually affects the field. But I always want to preface this, guys, because I probably don't mention this enough when we're talking about matchups. Do not double count things. That's something, and what I mean by that is Vegas lines, projections, all of this stuff is taking into account things like weather anyways, things like matchups anyways. So don't double count matchups, don't double count weather. A lot of it is in the projections, a lot of it is in the Vegas lines. We've seen a lot of these games, the totals come down. That is stuff that matters for sure. So hopefully that was useful. I'll continue to kind of touch on that as we continue through here, guys. So let's move back over to the data sheet. Obviously, LineMovement.com, if you're here for the first time, the resources tab, NFL data table. This is a free resource that's available to everyone that comes to LineMovement.com. Also, this is something I used to give away to all my Twitch subscribers, which was not free. So it's kind of cool that we've made this available to everyone. I mean, this is where I'm building my lineups. I think it's probably the best free resource for fantasy football, for DFS, for betting out there. Obviously, we have all the betting lines in here from blitzbet.eu, of course. But also at each position, what I think really matters. We have some ownership projections in here. Lots of great stuff. So at wide receiver, first thing I always start with, weighted opportunity rating. So we're looking at market share of air yards. We're looking at target market share of a whole as a team. It can kind of just be a quick and dirty way of just like finding some of the very underpriced assets at wide receiver. So we want deep targets. We want all that stuff. One of the guys that I think that we should probably talk about right away, though, Keenan Allen at 6,200. He's going to be extremely chalky, but for good reason, guys. So Justin Herbert, like, say what you want about this kid, he is not scared to just throw it to his best player and to throw it to his best player consistently, which is crazy. He is averaging in 4 full games with Justin Herbert, 13.2 targets per game. That is insane. So his weighted opportunity, 0.7, very high number, obviously. He's only 6,200, which I don't really understand. Maybe this game ends up being a little bit, there's some pace concerns, obviously, in this game. I think there's a chance that it's decently run-heavy overall. But there's good weather. This defense in Denver is banged up. If you're projecting a guy at 6,200 for what? Like we talked about, he's averaging 13.2, but that's not his median. If you've been projecting him for 9 targets in the spot, 6,200, I love Keenan Allen at 6,200. I think he's a great play. So if we're looking past Keenan Allen, one of the guys that I think is super interesting that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, I actually think he could go under-owned what the projection is for him right now. Devontae Adams, I don't think he'll be 21%. I'm going to disagree with that. So I think people are going to get off of this Green Bay and Minnesota game because of wind. I think that people are just going to pay up for Kamara. They're going to pay up for Derrick Henry. They're going to pay up for the Kansas City defense. All that stuff. Devontae Adams at 8,800, guys. Like, I hate like kind of like just chasing these massive games, but like how easy is it in a slate where we don't have like just a ton of like slam dunk Christian McCaffrey-esque type of bell cow running backs that are also involved in the passing game? Devontae Adams at 8,800. I think makes a really great tournament play today. Massive team total. This is a Minnesota team that he has just eviscerated over the course of his career. So, like, if there's one guy that's just going to be like zone, we talk about Herbert is like zoning into one guy. There's times where Aaron Rodgers just marches up the field with Davante Adams. It's wild. Like, there really isn't a cornerback on the Vikings that can come anywhere close to shutting down Davante Adams or even slowing him down. Like, a lot of rookies, a lot of really young guys in that secondary. I mean, literally, guys, 14 catches, 156 yards, and 2 touchdowns when this team, when Green Bay and Minnesota in week 1. He's expensive. Highest weighted opportunity rating on the slate in this top tier. I'm trying to make a priority to get to Davante Adams today on some teams. I don't want to be running into this slate without any. That's for sure. Chris says he's all over Cleveland and Las Vegas. Yeah, I like that game a lot too, Chris. A lot of win concerns for sure. I loved Henry Ruggs earlier. Now I don't like him as much. But I think there's some plays in that game, man. I'm with you. Marquis Brown at 6,100. Definitely one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. I think that he's someone that's just way too cheap. Again, if we're just looking at like the metrics that matter, sure, but also just like the narrative surrounding that Baltimore hasn't completely had to air it out in games yet this year. They haven't needed to. So is this a spot where he does end up getting deep? I think it's possible. I think this game is actually very sneaky. This Baltimore-Pittsburgh game, and I think also the Detroit and Indy game, I think there's a chance that both of those go under-owned, and I think they're kind of sneaky shootout spots. Nice team total, 26.5 at blitzbet.eu for Baltimore at Pittsburgh. Going to be a fun game to watch overall. One thing that I do like to look at also is yards per route run. This is something where you'll find some of these elite wide receivers. Kenny Goliday at 6,600 is another guy that I think is a fantastic play today. We talked about kind of the mini correlation with potentially playing Goliday and playing the running back on the other side of it in Indy. I think that's interesting for sure. Ant said they're saying the wind is really bad in Lambeau. I mean, it sounds like it, right? 20 to 26 mile per hour sustained winds, gusts of 40. That's very, very high. So that's what, like, even though like there's not a ton to love in a game like Detroit Indy usually, but like when we know the conditions are going to be strong in a dome, Kenny Goliday at 6,600, 2.8 yards per route run, still 0.6 weighted opportunity. I don't think that his price is really caught up for his upside yet. And if he's going to be sub 10%, like the ownership is looking like right now, I love the Kenny Goliday play. When we talked about quarterback, my favorite quarterback on the slate is Russell Wilson by a pretty significant margin. Love the Seattle and San Francisco game. Tyler Lockett is 7,100. 0.6 weighted opportunity. Obviously, this insane game that he had last week. But what was crazy is the salaries were actually released before he threw up that 20-target game, 3 touchdowns, whatever it was last week on Sunday night. He's still too cheap. On DraftKings, he's 7,100. On FanDuel, he's 72. I would say on FanDuel, he's very, very cheap. But on DraftKings, it's interesting. I like the idea of going to Metcalf at kind of a little bit lower ownership because everyone just saw his failure last week. Maybe Lockett ends up kind of getting more ownership because this game obviously isn't a concern. But also, that 7,100 price tag, I guess, feels a little low to me. So I think that's interesting. Lockett is kind of that slot to underneath role. Definitely a little bit of a better floor than Metcalf, but Metcalf is still going to be getting those deeper targets that we want. 0.6 weighted opportunity for Metcalf. Obviously, 2.1 yards per route run, still very strong for him. So I love the play. Love Metcalf, love Lockett, love that entire stack. Like in order to make the Seattle and San Francisco stack work, you do have to get kind of gross with some of the cheaper wide receiver plays, which we'll get to in a second. But I do think that that's a direction we could go. What else we got here? Justin Jefferson at 6,500. We mentioned that that's the guy that I think will be probably the most impacted by wind. But I do think that that's still a spot that if you did want to go there, that's a game that originally we thought was going to be very high scoring. Now with the wind concerns, both teams might just end up running the ball a ton. It was a great spot overall because Green Bay 31st at defending the deep ball. I'm kind of backing away slowly from that one a little bit. One that I'm not really backing away slowly from, Brandon Ayuk. He's expensive on DraftKings, but I do think that he's a guy with Deebo Samuel out. Again, that game that I love. I think that he's still super interesting. So we'll mention him. Also, I think that if you're going to go all the way down, I do have some interest in these cheap guys for the Jets. Denzel Mims in particular. So Denzel Mims, obviously not a big sample size here. 3,200, 0.7 weighted opportunity. Obviously, it's a decent spot. I guess from game script alone, we know that they're going to have to throw the ball to attempt to keep up with KC. But I think it's interesting. I still think that he's my preferred option because Matt Harmon told us earlier in the week Denzel Mims is just a straight baller. He actually, it's not the Jeff Smith who's just like not a very good player and he's leaving all these air yards on the field. Denzel Mims, if he's getting opportunity, he's the top guy that you want in that offense. You can make an argument for Braxton Berrios also at 3,500. So if Mims and Berrios are I guess pieces that get you to some of these elite options, I think this is a slate that it does make sense to go starts and scrubs personally because there's some very good plays on the slate at the high end, and we do have some reasonable value. So Perriman's out, Crowder doubtful. So I think that even though these guys feel thin in terms of Mims and Berrios, I still think that like pricing's tight enough to where it like you need guys like this. I don't know if this is going to be like last week where there was just like these massive scores. I would think probably not because of all the weather concerns that we have. So maybe you can afford to punt things off with Denzel Mims, Braxton Berrios, and some of those cheaper wide receiver options. Some other cheaper guys outside of the Jets guys, you could probably make some sort of argument. Deontay Harris, 3,300 for the New Orleans. Maybe Josh Reynolds against Miami. He's 3,100. He's still someone that saw 8 targets last week at 3,100. So I think he's interesting. MVS, if you did want to go there, no one's going to play MVS in this Minnesota game because of the win now. He'll be sub 1%. Darnell Mooney, 3,500, still popping in the air yards by low. I think he's interesting. What do we think about AJ Green at 4,500? He's like just past this tier of cheaper guys. But I do like him quite a bit. We talked about Burrow being one of the top quarterback options today. I think he's interesting for sure. But I think AJ Green's probably going to be the highest owned of that group. But I do think that Denzel Mims is kind of gaining steam quickly for good reason. We talked about if you're running out a Cam Newton stack, Jacoby Meyers, 3,500. He's someone that makes a lot of sense for the matchup against Buffalo. Buffalo can be beat in the slot. If you want to just go completely cheap with him at 3,500, Cam Newton 5,700. Start your stack with a very cheap correlation, allow you to get in some of these Seattle players. If you allow you to get in Henry, Kamara, I'm in on that. Thoughts on Marcus Johnson? He's like the other guy, Santiago. I think he's interesting. I think I prefer the other guys that we talked about. But now that like I guess that game, like Indy Detroit, like we don't have to worry about any concerns whatsoever. Yeah, at 3K he's fine. He'll probably be lower owned than some of these guys too, I would imagine. Maybe not the higher stakes, but 8 targets last week, 40 of 63 snaps. Putting all your hearts and dreams behind Phillip Rivers seems bad, but hey, he's still in min. I think there's worse plays for sure. Definitely trying to get to Kenny Goliday in that game, but if you're like stacking up Rivers for some crazy reason, yeah, you can add in Marcus Johnson. I guess the same thing I was talking about, like if you wanted to play Jonathan Taylor on the Indy side, no one's going to play DeAndre Swift at 5,300. He just hasn't been getting the volume, but the upside is there. So like a mini correlation with Swift and Marcus Johnson at a cheap price tag, it's somewhat interesting. Coleman at 4K seems like the Jeff Wilson spot. Yeah, but what do we think the ceiling is there, Carlos? What do we think the ceiling is there? Probably pretty low, in my opinion. Pittman is activated. Yeah, he's still 4K, so maybe that takes a little bit away from Marcus Johnson. I think that's fair. Wentz or Herbert? I prefer Herbert, Brendan. So we got 928 people in here right now. We got 46 people on Twitch. Anyone watching on Twitch right now, bring it over to YouTube. Let's crack 1K for the second week in a row. That would be awesome. If anyone's here for the first time, would love it if you would consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that like button, toss on the notification bell. Randomly throughout the week, I go live early, so you'll only know that if you hit that notification bell. Obviously on Twitch, you get something right to your phone. YouTube, they make you click one more thing to make that happen. So we've been going through the NFL data table at linemovement.com. Definitely join us there. Also, one thing that I haven't mentioned in a while, we do have the Patreon now, $1 a month, 25 cents a week. get access to the premium Discord chat, kind of talk with the community after the live streams are over. Also join our weekly DraftKings tournament. Last week we gave away a $20 Amazon gift card. This week it's going to be a $30 Amazon gift card. Get in there. I'll be doing a 15 to 30 minute live stream directly before kickoff, obviously with a ton going on this morning. It'd be kind of valuable to get some final thoughts there as I'm building teams. That is not on YouTube. That's only in the Discord. We have a Red Zone channel in there, so if you want to come watch the game, sweat with us, definitely join us for that. Should we talk about tight end, guys? I guess any final thoughts at wide receiver? I think we touched on a lot of the guys. There is some value, which is nice. I feel like we haven't had decent wide receiver value in a while, but we have a lot this week. All right, let's touch on tight end. Let's do it. So the tight end position. I haven't played Kittle in a while. I'm always kind of concerned by just the quarterback play, the fact that he blocks a decent amount, all those good things. In I guess comparison to someone like Andrews, Kelsey, Waller. This spot against Seattle, I think Kittle is one of the best plays on the slate. So like Jimmy Garoppolo, if you like Jimmy Garoppolo in this spot, obviously Deebo Samuel out. Like who's going to get those short area yards after the catch type of usage? It's George Kittle. Like, yes, Brandon Ayuk, I understand. He's going to be taking a decent amount of the Deebo role. But what happens if George Kittle gets like 12 targets in this game? At that $7K price tag in a great game environment, I'm interested for sure. So there's a chance maybe the 49ers gets run a ton just to try and keep Russ off the field. I guess that's the argument on the other side. I think on FanDuel, he's extremely valuable at 7,700, but on DraftKings, it's a little bit tougher to get there in some of these stacks because if you're stacking up this San Francisco and Seattle game, if you're playing Russ, like Russ, Lockett, Metcalf, bring it back with Kittle, that's an expensive stack. You're going to have to play some of these cheaper wide receivers. Maybe you can't even afford to get up someone like Kareem Hunt in the flex, something like that. So it's interesting. I love the idea of Kittle at 7K. That's going to be one where as I start building teams, we'll see if it's as easy to get there as I thought. The other guy on this slate that I really love is Darren Waller. I think that, yes, the weather, Chris mentioned in the chat before, it's one of his favorite games. I'm with him. The weather in Cleveland is definitely a concern. But Waller, especially if there's not going to be as much like rugs down the field type of usage. Yes, Josh Jacobs, maybe they run a decent amount. I get all that. But Waller at 5,600, a 0.6 weighted opportunity. Again, at wide receiver, guys, that's like elite wide receiver usage. And we're getting at a tight end, a position that's terrible overall, just like so much more variance. So Darren Waller at 5,600, if he was a wide receiver, he would be in a lot of lineups, guys. If there was a wide receiver at 5,600 that was a 0.6 weighted opportunity rating with a decent team total and a decent matchup, we'd be all over it. So I love it. 85 plus yards and or a TD in 4 of his last 5 games. Just even looking at the matchup, the short area of the field, Cleveland, 26 in the NFL. So I like it. He's running a ton of routes, top 3 in terms of his routes run over the last 4. His yards per route run could be a little bit better for sure, but it's still reasonable. Another guy down here, Noah Fant, 4,700. He's been banged up. I think that Fant is someone that could come in here and have a decent game at somewhat lower ownership. I skipped over Travis Kelce at 6,600 because I do prefer in a vacuum if you're going to play Kelce or if you're going to play Tyreek Hill. I prefer Tyreek Hill, who we didn't talk about enough probably in the wide receiver section. But this massive team total just staring me in the face at tight end, and we know at tight end it is extremely, extremely important to capture upside through touchdowns, that sort of thing. So I have a ton of interest in Travis Kelce again at 6,600. 0.5 weighted opportunity, very strong. Yards per route run, very strong. He's run 62 routes per game over the last 4. Over the last 4, 62 routes. That's very solid, guys. He's going to be owned 6,600. I don't know. That's kind of part of the reason I like Kittle too, because I think a lot of people just play Kelce in that range. Maybe this is just a week where both of those guys end up being super highly owned. I could see it. But like basically last week, anyone that played Kelce, it's tough, right? Because like when your defense goes off, like the KC defense did last week, there's just not as many touchdowns to go around for someone like Kelce. So the concern is that if there's nothing on the Jets side of this game, and maybe the touchdowns happen to go to Tyreek Hill, someone else, it's hard to get there in terms of the price tag. So I guess that's like my tiebreaker, I guess, is I prefer Tyreek because he can get there on one play. Travis Kelce, like in order for him to completely go nuclear, he's got to get in the box at least once. So I think that's concerning. But I actually really like the KC stack overall because like even if he ends up getting pulled, which could easily happen in this game, like all the starters, it's possible they get 3-4 touchdowns like before the fourth quarter, and then you're fine anyway. So especially if we get like the Mahomes like triple stack or whatever it is at lower ownership, I do have a ton of interest there. So I guess a week where I'm trying to pay up at tight end, if you guys haven't noticed. I think it's interesting. Jeff says double tight end week. Maybe. I very rarely do that personally. I think that if I'm gonna like actively try and jam in a non-running back in my flex, it's gonna be one of these elite wide receivers. Thielen or Fournette for flex? Thielen for me, Marcus. On the cheaper side of things, who do we like at tight end? Harrison Bryant, 3,200. Obviously, Hooper is out. I mean, even if Njoku is out there, just like last week, they run a ton of 2 tight end sets. Also, Bryant still gets a ton of run. 3,200 is a nice price tag on DraftKings, I think. Like there's obviously nowhere near the ceiling of some of these other guys that we're talking about. But I think that if you're trying to save at tight end, he'd be the guy that I'd like. I also like Hunter Henry at 4,200. I mentioned this Chargers and Denver game could be a little bit slower paced, but no one's going to continue to keep firing at Hunter Henry, which feels kind of bad in some ways because he's getting the volume. He just hasn't been doing a ton with it overall. If he ends up being like the lowest owned in that group, I like Hunter Henry a lot. I like Eric Ebron also. We talked about Pittsburgh and them being decently lower owned against Baltimore. I think Ebron at 3,900 is another tight end I like. So if I'm trying to get different at tight end, it's probably with Henry or Ebron, 2 guys that I still think carry a ceiling for sure. But this Pittsburgh team, I didn't mention, I do really like Claypool kind of in that mid-range, 5,200 at low ownership. Everyone wants to just tell me that Deontay Johnson's going to continue to get 15 targets a game. I think that's probably not true. So I guess I'm interested in playing the other side of that in this Baltimore game. Any thoughts there, chat? Hunter Henry or Mike Gesicki? I like Henry a lot, but we'll say this. Like Gesicki has been running with Tua for a while in practice, even before he's been the starter. They've been actively trying to develop that chemistry. Claypool or Deontay Johnson? I think Claypool in a tournament. Deontay Johnson's, I mean, he's going to be out there. He's going to have he's a very good player also. That's why I kind of have some interest in Pittsburgh overall today because they seem lower owned than they should be. Anything else I'm missing at tight end here? Gesicki at 4,900. I think I prefer Noah Fant, but I understand it if you wanted to go there. You could just go down to Hunter Henry or Ebron at that point for me. I love Waller at 5,600 though. He seems like the one that's kind of standing out. Do you guys disagree? What's up, Aaron? How's it going, man? What's the ownership for Johnny? 10% roughly? Because I think Tannehill is going to be relatively popular. I think Johnny's fine. Johnny is like the guy that he always pops in yards per route run because he runs some deeper routes, more wide receiver-esque type of routes. You don't see that from these guys that aren't talented typically. So I like that. It's a decent price tag, decent team total. The volume isn't quite as like some of these other guys we're talking about, but I think it's okay. Smashing the viewership, great size group in here. Yeah, man, it's been fun. These Sunday shows have been fun, Aaron. Appreciate you, man. Even if we don't break 1K every week, these are great. These are very great. All right, so like I'm gonna try and catch up a little bit on some of these questions in the chat. Obviously, I'll touch on the win quickly for anyone that's just trickling in. The ones that we're really concerned about: Minnesota and Green Bay, Las Vegas, Cleveland, New England, and Buffalo. All of those games could see 20 mile per hour winds plus sustained. Some of the gusts getting up to like 40 miles per hour. So that's really a concern for sure. Some of these other games, I guess there's still 15 mile per hour winds projected in New Orleans and Chicago, Tennessee and Cincinnati. That is 5 games on this slate. Pretty crazy. Just can't seem to piece together a lineup I love. Chris, I'll say this. I struggled more in roster construction today than I have in like 5 or 6 weeks because like the stacks don't fit together seamlessly for me today. Almost like paying down for Fursker over playing Jonnu. Maybe. It's probably thin, though. Irv Smith. Someone in the chat said Irv Smith. Let me take a look at him. I played a little bit of Irv in my day. It just seems like a low-volume passing offense. Dalvin's back. Irv Smith is 3K. Target share, 5 targets back-to-back weeks. Still playing a decent amount of snaps. He's got 2 red zone targets last week also. I think Irv's okay. I don't think there's a high ceiling there, man. I really don't. I think this is a week where like there are some decent tight end options to get up to if you can. Gallman or Hasty? Probably neither for me, ISO. Not in DFS. Coleman 4K on DK. Like, guys, this if you're kind of coming over from season long, I understand it. Like in the flex, get those guys in if they're going to see volume. From a DFS perspective, I don't think that there's enough touches there for them to have a huge ceiling. Do I have a link for the Patreon? Should be in my description, Eric. Trey Burton. I do love Trey Burton. If I haven't talked about him yet, I love that game, man. I'm trying to figure out different ways to like back in to that Detroit game. Trey Burton's a great way to do it. 3,500. Yeah, I can't believe I missed him when talking about tight end. Yeah. I'm in on that for sure. Thanks for that, Ricardo. Yeah, Trey Burton. Volume's not crazy or anything like that, but in a great game environment, cheap price tag. Like, again, like little mini stacks. Trey Burton, bring it back with Kenny Goliday. I like that a lot. Someone in the chat asking about defense. Best cheap defense. I do like the Cleveland defense at 2,600, especially since a lot of people were considering stacking up that game. 2,600 is a great price for Cleveland, who's going to rush the passer very well. Also think that both defenses in Green Bay and Minnesota, probably the Green Bay one would be the one I'm most interested in at 2,900. But that's like as cheap as I've kind of looked so far. You can make an argument maybe for Miami at 2,400 against LA. It's just there's not going to be, I mean, hopefully there's going to be enough passing in that game. That would be my big concern. Maybe Detroit at 2,500. There's a few options down here. What's crazy is the projection for Kansas City right now. They're 4,500 on DraftKings. Like, are you guys considering playing at least one team with KC defense today? It's hard to get there at that price tag, but man, that's wild. Steve Young, thanks for subscribing, man. Yeah, I always want to remind, we got 800 people in here. If you're here for the first time, we're live every Monday and Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Also on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Hit that subscribe button, toss a like on this video. 282 likes, guys. That's just massive. It's like the way this works, if anyone is like basically perusing some fantasy football content and they see that, that's huge. Lamar is the best play today. I don't mind Lamar. I think there's better options. He's 7,400 though, at 5%. So Lamar Jackson to Hollywood Brown, bring it back with Chase Claypool. Now we're cooking with gas for GPPs. Johnson from the Colts, I think, is okay. I think I prefer the Jets, guys. No, I hate saying that. Jonnu Smith or Mark Andrews. It's Mark Andrews for me. Just joined the Patreon this morning. Connected Discord, but Patreon is not joining the channel for me. There should be a ton of kind of troubleshooting stuff in the Discord, man. Check that channel. There'll be someone in there that can help you out, man. Darnell Mooney. I like Mooney. I think Mooney's interesting. We didn't talk a ton about like some game environment stuff outside of the weather, so I think there's a couple games in terms of pace that I really like. Talked about San Francisco and Seattle. That's one of my favorite games on the slate for plays, that sort of thing. I think the Chargers and Denver game is at least kind of interesting from a contrarian standpoint. Tennessee and Cincy I had a little bit more interest in before all the weather, but I still think that's a great spot for plays. Some of the slower pace games, this New England and Buffalo game, guys, it seems like it's just going to be really slow and gross. So outside of maybe some really just like kind of small stacks with Cam or naked Cam, I don't like a lot of plays in that New England Buffalo game. Minnesota Green Bay, like that's another thing, guys. That game could be really slow pace. There could be a lot of running on both sides. So keep that in mind. Thoughts on playing Adam Troutman, tight end for New Orleans this week? Not really for me. I'm not really like trying to guess right on like that offense. You know what I mean? I think there's better spots with like a little bit less fragility. Burrow or Lamar? Still Lamar, guys. I do love Burrow though. Is Tevin Coleman in play? At 4K, he's in play. Yeah, I just don't think, I don't know if the ceiling is there for him. Thoughts on Mims volume today? I like Mims. Mims is my favorite cheaper option for the Jets. over Berrios, but I think both are fine at their price. Cam sucks, he will be pulled. That's possible. Seattle tight end with passing volume? Maybe. I haven't played a ton of Greg Olsen this year. I think the only way I would consider that is if I was like fully stacking up that game and I just needed some like salary saving. But if I'm stacking up that game, I'm probably playing Kittle. You know what I mean? Mims or Corey Davis? I think it's Mims for me. Mims or Bourne? All these Mims questions. I like Bourne. Bourne's another guy we didn't talk about serious. Jimmy G, AU, Kittle, DK. It's a great stack, Ryan. I like it. Why Lamar over Burrow? Probably because he's going to have 50 rushing yards as a floor. And I like the ownership on him. I'm a sucker for getting a guy like Lamar Jackson at like sub 10% in tournaments. If you're taking into consideration price, then yeah, Burrow is still a great play, man. Not trying to talk you off Burrow at all. Who's my prediction on biggest sleeper? You guys always want your sleepers. Let's talk about leverage for a second. This is something I think we should do every week, right? So if you're not late swapping, you're doing it wrong, in my opinion, in DFS. So like what I mean by that is these games in the afternoon, if things go wrong, you got to get actively trying to make your teams different in order to kind of at least save your day. Like there's some things that could definitely go wrong today, guys, with all the weather that we have. So the afternoon games, we got Chargers, Broncos, we got Saints, Bears, we got 49ers, Seahawks. It's part of the reason I love that Seahawks game so much, for the record, guys. So if we're just looking from those games, the leverage, I think that there's a ton of leverage here on Noah Fant. I think there's a ton of leverage on Hunter Henry. We talked about like how a lot of people, maybe if they're paying up at tight end, they're just going to go right to Kittle, right to Kelsey. I like the idea of Henry, Fant from a contrarian standpoint today. I think that's interesting. If you wanted to get really weird, like people talk about like Tevin Coleman, but no one wants to even like consider Latavius Murray at 4,300. It's the same play. It's literally the same play. Not that I'm like super in on that or anything. The thing that I like about Hunter Henry though, guys, is if Keenan Allen ends up being the mega chalk and I expect him to be at 6,200, Hunter Henry at like 5% or less, I think is a great way to leverage that game. So at quarterback, Russ and Jimmy G would be the most popular ones in this range. So if you're way behind, moving to like a Justin Herbert stack, I think is interesting. So I like that. Allen Robinson is 7K. I don't think anyone's going to play Allen Robinson. That one's a little bit tougher to stomach, but the ceiling should be there. No ownership. So I hope that like somewhat answered your question on sleepers, man. That's how I think about it. It's like, who would I be late swapping to if I had to? I think that's like kind of like the first place I start, you know? So like basically like some of the chalk in the morning games, if it ends up being like Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt, Jamal Williams, Gio Bernard, maybe Tyreek Hill. Like if you have some failures in there, Kelsey, I'd be moving. Bell ownership? I don't think Bell's going to be highly owned. I mean, is there enough people that are on that? 15% maybe? He'll be lower at high stakes. But I could see that. Claypool, 150 yards, 2 TDs on Bet Online plus. That's crazy, man. That's a hell of a prop. I wish we would have gotten our polls working. That's a bummer. I'll try and get that working for next week for sure. Stafford with Goliday, running it back with Pascal. Maybe. I think if you're going to stack up Stafford and that side of it, I kind of like the idea of on the other side of it playing Jonathan Taylor. You know what I mean? Bell gets 2 TDs. Yeah, what if he gets 2 TDs on like 30 yards? You know? If Hunt cannot do it this week, he'll be a secondary pass catching rest of the career. Yeah, I mean, Aaron, like this is the week to play Hunt, man, in my opinion. Do I like Claypool over Johnson? I think ownership considered, I do, Demo. Double digit targets when Johnson was out. Yeah, like that's the narrative, right? I think Claypool is talented enough to where like if that skews even like slightly in his direction a little bit more, I'd still think he's a really nice play. Chicago D. What's their price? We got Nico in the chat dropping knowledge here. 2,800. I think they'll draw some ownership. I don't normally try and target Drew Brees because he doesn't throw a ton of picks because he'll just throw it away. It's like the Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady thing. Like, they don't take a lot of sacks usually either. Darrell Henderson or Lock in the flex. I love Tyler Lockett today. Is it the Hilton game finally? Richard, I don't know, man. I feel like we've been chasing that. Like, he's someone, like, in theory. Yeah. I mean, he's 4,900 in a dome. This Lions team, 10th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I don't know. It's tough because, like, you have to tie that ceiling to the wide receiver also to the ceiling of the quarterback in some ways, and I'm just not sure if Hilton is the guy. Like, at that range, I just would prefer to play A.J. Green with Joe Burrow, I think, because I think the ceiling's higher. Another guy we didn't mention, Rashard Higgins, with Odell Beckham out, obviously. I think Higgins is a guy that just, like, have so much chemistry with Baker. He's 4,200, so I think a lot of people might just prefer to pay down a little bit more, but I think Higgins is interesting, especially with, like, the way he's being used in this game with wind. I think that's it. If he sees, like, 6 targets, it's a really nice price tag for Rashard Higgins. Jerry Jeudy, I guess similar in that way, 4,800. Slightly more expensive than I'd like to see for him, but he's still probably going to see 7 targets. Jacoby Meyers, like, I'm just going through, like, some of these wide receiver plays that I think that we could see volume from that are a little bit cheaper. We talked about Hollywood Brown. We talked about Brandon Ayuk, Kendrick Bourne. These are all these guys I think that are underpriced. What do we think about Juju? So, like, I've built some teams with, like, a Pittsburgh mini stack, not with Ben, but like a Juju, Claypool, Ebron, bring it back with Hollywood. I think those are interesting, or like 2 of those plays. Higgins, Ruggs, or Mims. Man, Ruggs scares me a little bit today, man. I like Mims and his price on DraftKings. I like Higgins overall in that group probably. Would I play Kamara and Adams in cash games? I would, yeah. Thoughts on Seattle running back situation? I'm a little bit nervous that they might turn that into somewhat of a committee. So I'm kind of avoiding the running back situation in Seattle personally. Like, if Travis Homer even takes like 10 touches away, I'm like not super interested in it overall. Is Naked Russ viable? Yep. The weapons are expensive there, man. So if you're going to do something like that, Drumcraft, I would make sure that the rest of your lineup is very correlated also. You know? Maybe you play like a Naked Russ with Kittle or something like that, and then like the rest of your roster is some mini stacks also with other games different, like without the quarterbacks, you know what I mean? Aguilar better play than Ruggs? Price considered, maybe. Mims and Jamal Williams or Bourne and Gio. I prefer the Mims Williams side personally. Dobbins starts to take over the backfield today, maybe. I'm usually not the one that's early on those situations, right? That's a tough projection to make. And then you could just be like really sad with a guy that touches the ball 12 times, you know? Like, giving up those running back slots that are so valuable is a tough thing to do. Guys, if you haven't checked out the Line Movement YouTube channel, would definitely love for you guys to join us for that show in about 30 minutes. Myself, Peter Overzet, and also Dieter Kurtenbach. We'll run through this entire slate from a betting perspective, each game. Hopefully we'll get some takes from Peter in terms, I know he's really deep into the news this time of the morning, so hopefully we'll get a little bit of an update there. That's over on the Line Movement channel. If you guys haven't checked out the Tilt Space, again, myself, Peter, and Michael Leone, a lot of fun. So this could be a day where it's not so fun for our lineups if there's not a lot of scoring. So join us 6:30 p.m. Eastern time for the Tilt Space on the Line Movement YouTube channel. We'll walk through all of our high stakes teams, also some of our bets against the spread and the super contests in Vegas. This is a show if you haven't joined us live for, you should definitely do that later today. Brady, thanks for your subscription, man. Really appreciate that. Seriously, man. We talk about this every time. I always want to mention it at least once throughout the stream, like the likes, the comments, like the videos that go up throughout the week. Like, that stuff really helps, like all of that. But just being here on a Sunday morning, guys, more than enough. Seriously. Just appreciate you guys being here. What P play has you tilting already? I don't know. The chat has been flowing. There is 100 new messages in our Tilt Space chat between Peter and Leone since I've been live. So I'm not sure what they're talking about yet. Should I roster both Hasty and Coleman? So the season-long perspective, right? I probably wouldn't be rostering both of those guys, so I could help it. But it depends on your waiver wire, man. Deontay Johnson or Robert Woods? I do like Deontay Johnson. Domsman, thanks for your subscription, man. Matt Belatich, thank you guys. Appreciate it. If you're here for the first time, welcome in. P. Ryan, I think it's thin, Evan. How do I feel about T.Y. Hilton in a GP? Nathan, scroll back like, I don't know, 5 minutes. We talked about T.Y. Hilton at length. I think he's okay. I prefer other guys that are tying me to a quarterback with more upside. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of why I still kind of gravitate towards like AJ Green at times. Update here from Cleveland. Wind is not that bad yet. That's nice. I love that game. Jay Smooth, thanks for that update, man. Appreciate it. Gaskin or Terry, rest of season. I love Terry McLaurin. But Gaskin is like one of those few guys that could continue to have like a bell cow role. So I think it's Gaskin, but it depends on your roster, man. I love Terry McLaurin. So that's a hard answer for me. But I would always skew towards the bell cow running back personally. Join your Patreon. Now I need to figure out where to see everything. There should be someone to help you out in the Discord, Eric. You should have an email from Discord or from Patreon, I believe. That'll help you lock it all up and get all set up, man. Yeah, the contest is filling. Every time I look at it, there's more people. Let's see how many people are in it now. The DraftKings contest. $30 Amazon gift card, free entry. I guess $1 entry for joining the Patreon. But we have 87 people in the Patreon contest right now. And we have 154 Patreons. Do a quick refresh. So there's some guys that are Patreons that are not even in the DraftKings contest yet. Hopefully you guys, there's 163 Patreons now. That's cool. We're going to have to continue to keep building up the prize pool then. A $30 gift card seemed like the right move earlier in the week. Now it's going to have to be bumped up. Good stuff. All right, guys, going to take some final questions. The show for the Line Movement YouTube channel will be in about a half an hour from now. So make sure you check out my description for that link. 324 likes. Appreciate that, guys. Like over half the people in here almost right now. We got 50 people over on Twitch still hanging out. Twitch people, what do I have to do to get you over to the YouTube streets? It should be a fun day, guys. I'm excited for these slates. I like these like chaotic slates because it's more of a puzzle, right? Like getting to like the best plays, the quote unquote best plays, that is not the hard part. We'll go through that. We'll go through each position. We'll always do it. But these are the ones where it's like building the puzzle that I think are really fun. This is why I love DFS. Like I like season long. I like best ball. I like sports betting. I love DFS because it is like about beating others. You know what I mean? George, you're the man. Never me. Connor or Hollywood Brown? I love Hollywood Brown, Jarrett. Yeah, let's get in some final questions. Trevor says Twitch is better. Twitch is great for community, Trevor. I am definitely not denying that. For growth, like we've seen it this year, YouTube far superior, in my opinion. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you, man. Of course, Fady. I try and get to as many questions as I can. If I missed your question throughout the chat, guys, I do the best I can, trust me. Could you have Bourne and Mims in your lineup? I think you could. I have built some stars and scrubs teams with 2 very cheap wide receivers today. Noah Fant or Mark Andrews full point PPR. I mean, Mark Andrews is probably the better, raw point play. I like Noah Fant in tournaments today, though. Wentz or Brady? Man, Brady just has the weapons now. Kenny Goliday versus AJ Brown. I prefer Kenny Goliday. I love Kenny Goliday today. Any love for Henderson this week, given the ownership being low and a good matchup? Let me see what I have Henderson for touches right now. He's one that I've like not been trying to avoid, but I just haven't been playing enough of probably. That one's harder for me, man. I think it's okay. I've got him projected for 16 touches, but only 2 receptions right now, 2.3 receptions. So that's a borderline. 5,900. It's a decent pivot though. So I like the thought process. If like you're going to be pivoting to a lower owned running back, just you want it to be a guy that has volume. You know what I mean? Let's end this with a fun poll. Are you playing Derrick Henry today on like a main team? One in the chat, yes. Actually, we'll just go yes and no. Are you playing Derrick Henry today? Yes or no in the chat on a main team on DraftKings. Are you playing the big dog? Are you with me? Or are you not with me? Derrick Henry is 8K on DraftKings. Yes or no in the chat. Let's hear it. And then we'll wrap this up. Or a 1. That's fine too, Aaron. Jay Smooth, yes. Marcus Allen, no. We are very split already, and I love it. Oh, man. If there's actually more no's than I expected. If I talked you off of Derrick Henry, I apologize in advance for that 90-yard touchdown. The process will tell you that a Derrick Henry at 26%, a guy that doesn't catch passes at 8K, is not the best idea, but the ceiling is always going to be there. He's going to touch the ball 24 times. Oh, we'll see if I get there. I'm not ready to like completely say I'm going to have 0% of him. But man, this is a tough slate. There's value in those touches on this slate where we just know that there's going to be some games that turn kind of gross. You know what I mean? Roman says always yes. Interesting. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. See you guys later for the Line Movement show in about 30 minutes. Also, the Tilt Space tonight. Appreciate everyone that's here. I'll remind you one last time, toss a like on this video. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Definitely just search Joe Holka. You'll find it. All the great segments we have throughout the week. Jake Seeley, Sigmund Bloom. Who else we got? Tons of guests. Matt Harmon, Rich Rebar, a little bit of Mike Tagliere and TJ Hernandez, myself. All those go up on the podcast feed as well. Do me a huge favor. Leave a rating and review. One of the best ways to support what I'm doing here. And I'll see you guys very soon.